They're going to make this about fighting Trump. They're going to make it about splashing out a major relief program and try to buy votes that way. Instead of, I mean, we could talk about it for a long time, but instead of, as my information is, standing up something at the border and actually cracking down on fentanyl and money laundering, which is an existential problem for Canada if we don't take care of it.
Sam Cooper, my brother, back in action a couple weeks later, and not much has changed. How you doing, my brother?
I'm doing fine.
So, I'm really excited to talk to you today, man, because Justice Hogue delivered her conclusion on the long-running foreign interference, the second foreign interference inquiry that started. When did it start? Back in October, November? Was that when it first launched?
It's about 16 months ago. Almost 2 years.
Okay. So 2 years of evidence presented.
Yeah.
Sam Cooper's investigative journalism on, under the spotlight. A lot of what has been presented and a lot of what the public knows is the result of your work. And I want to get that out there and say that right away, because I think that can't be emphasized enough. My brother, you have done tremendous work over the years. And I feel like this foreign interference inquiry, whether it's said directly or indirectly, is the result of you out there in cemeteries reading top secret documents and, reporting on the gruesome nature of our current political situation. So right off the bat, I want to ask you, how does it feel to watch all of your work, come to life in the form of this inquiry?
It's a great question. I think I'm still processing it, and I would agree with you that my work, as an author and a journalist, did cause this inquiry. It's the second time my work has done this. So I have lived experience, with the Cullen Commission in British Columbia. And so my view on the Cullen Commission, which I think is kind of a good way to get into this, was it confirmed my reporting. It confirmed what is known as the Vancouver model. It essentially, as I've told others, confirmed why the American government is so concerned about, fentanyl, Canada becoming a global money laundering hub. And I have conversations with, people in high levels of policing, in the background still, even though, I can't talk to people in intelligence that are called criminal leakers. But, and they say everything you're reporting, everything that people like Stephen Punwasi, who people, some of your followers will recognize is out there on X, a financial data analyst saying that Sam Cooper's reported, Canada commanding control for Western Hemisphere money laundering. He's looking at that as a quantitative analyst and saying 100%, right? We've got a huge problem. Everyone in policing knows it. And, my work for the BC Cullen Commission proved this is like an existential thing for Canada. And there were 200 recommendations that came out of that report. Only 3 minor ones, I believe, which have been enacted, which is another story. But Justice Cullen, a very respected judge, he was interviewed in, I believe it was UBC Law magazine, and said, the work of a canny and effective reporter that would not go away caused this inquiry. And I didn't agree with all his findings, but evidence came out that I didn't know of, data points, which I'll say because it's relevant. Over 1.2 billion in cash laundered through BC government casinos in 1 year. Everything consistent with Chinese transnational drug trafficking Vancouver model, right? So they took my work and they had access to records, went even further. But the results of, policy coming out of it, very weak. And so, as I say, this is why the US government, not just Hurricane Donald, but the US government has deep and continuing concerns with Canada. So on to Hogue. We've talked about it a lot. And I'll agree with you that out of anyone in Canada, I mean, my coverage, 2 stories a day often, and then you asking me to unpack it, in hour-long discussions. There's no one else in the world that has covered the details, like I have, and you have, been so interested. We've unpacked it. And you said, like, you're getting the impression that this is just a kind of, standard Canada whitewash is happening, right? These are just a bunch of lawyers that they're doing what they have to do because they have to. And I said, yeah, I see that, but I want to give the lawyers a chance. Okay, we've given them a chance. And I do think I'm not the only one. It's a whitewash at a basic level, possibly a cover up. And this is coming from diaspora community leaders. It's coming from former CSIS officials who are on the record. I've done other podcasts. We're not talking about leakers here. These are people that say, look, if a warrant, targeting a Liberal Party power broker before an election is delayed for, 2 months or more, and there's no good explanation from Bill Blair, Justin Trudeau's staff, then it's it's interference. So I'll get into that. But I mean, there's a lot of disappointment that I'm processing that the evidence on the records is a great thing. And I've continuously told you that for Canadians that care, there are now thousands of records on the public record that they never would have had any access to, except for my reporting, forcing the government to bring them to light. So that brings me to one positive thing Justice Hogue wrote. She said, the government has been non-transparent. It came as a shock to Canadians that foreign interference is happening. Foreign states are deeply attempting to interfere in our elections. Yeah. Hogue confirmed that. She said the government should have been talking to Canadians that our system is under attack. They didn't, and it only happened because journalism brought this to light. So that brings me to the bad. Justice Hogue said, while there have been deep and extensive efforts by foreign states, and it's now become a part of the public discourse, she minimized, the extent to which Canadian politicians are wittingly involved in that activity. She essentially said, she directly said, I can pretty much, paraphrase her quote, some politicians may have benefited due to their naivety or questionable ethics. There were some questionable things happening in Parliament by Canadian politicians, but she didn't see any evidence of traitorous activity. Now, full stop right there. No one, we've talked about the NSI cop report. I've been reporting on allegations. Never once have I reported that there was traitorous, which is a legal term, activity. I've said documents said some candidates were witting, allegedly, in Chinese election interference, clandestine activity. Some, according to CSIS, documents that I read were not witting, right? And so Hogue, and I believe the Trudeau government, in the aftermath of the public furor with the NSI cop report, which said some politicians have wittingly or semi-wittingly been involved in clandestine financial transactions, all types of, essentially inappropriate activity, but never once did that report quote traitors. This was like a media reaction. It was, reporters saying this is traitorous activity. And then you got headlines, then you got the public. And I've lived this, right? I only report the facts that are known. And then you have people that, whether they like headlines or whether they like misinformation, I'm not saying that there's not what could be called traitorous activity. I'm saying I never reported it, NSI cop. And then Hogue is asked by the public safety minister, because the government's in crisis, will you look into this? And suddenly now she's looking into, is there traitorous activity? Never once did any, CSIS report say that, or an NSI cop report. So we could talk on and on, but I just think it was really, it's a legal trick. It's a government trick. She comes out and she denies or says there's no evidence of something that no one else alleged there was evidence of. And we can talk on and on, But I do want to stress the positive. As I have before with you, records that Canadians can dig into for the next 50 years have been publicly tabled, and it's evidence. And anyone, I encourage anyone to get beyond any opinion column headlines and dig into those records themselves, and you'll see that very serious activity undermining Canada occurred and is occurring. And really, I'll end my answer by saying this. Justice Hogue's report, in her conclusions, in the way that, she used waffling words and shifted the examination, ends up being a disservice. But the process, all the documents produced, is a good. Simple.
Okay. So I want to start by saying this because, as this podcast grows and as our clips together gain millions and millions of views, of course, the people chiming in saying, oh, Sam Cooper, the conspiracy theorist, and so on and so forth, right? And I thought it was funny because the last episode we did together, the globalist idea came into the picture, and you left nail marks all the way down that rabbit hole as I pulled you further and further into the abyss, right? Like you're not a guy who's out there reporting and speculating and reporting on things that may or may not be true. You're just reporting the facts, and just based on what you've reported alone, you can draw a conclusion. See, what I feel like has happened here is it's like somebody robbed a bank, the windows are smashed, there's fingerprints everywhere, there's blood on the walls, it's a total crime scene. And 2 blocks down the street, a bunch of guys have been caught wearing ski masks with bags full of money. And for whatever reason, Justice Hogue is saying, well, we can't correlate the two because there's no connection between the crime and the people who are apprehended with all the cash, which to me is ridiculous, right? Like all you need to use is rational thought. And I feel like Canada's drifting away from that. We're drifting away from common sense. She's jumping through hoops. And as you said, it's a government trick, right? To move directly into treasonous activity because you're going all the way to the furthest extreme, right? And she's basing that off of people who have used your work and come to their own conclusions and speculated based on work that you've done, not anything you've said directly, and the reaction of people online, which I will say I'm one of them because I call a spade a spade. I'm not an idiot. We know what's happening here. But she used that public fervor as the base for her conclusion. Yeah. In saying that, we didn't find any cause to believe that there's treasonous activity going on. Well, what's happening between zero treasonous activity and treasonous activity? Because there's a lot going on there, right?
No question. You nailed it. I mean, and this is why I like to give lawyers and judges a chance to be reasonable and logical. But what we've both seen, that is your conclusions go to something you weren't asked to do. And by doing that, you're helping the government. And that's why I say this is why I've seen credible former intelligence agents say this is a whitewash. I've seen people say, I can't say it publicly, and I'm talking about politicians that should know this is a cover-up, but they can't come out and say that, right? And the evidence of a cover-up, I'll quote a former CSIS officer that read my reports on the Hogue Commission final report, and this delay of at least 54 days of a warrant targeting a senior Liberal Party power broker who has direct relationships with Bill Blair and his staff and the Prime Minister's office. And Justice Hogue said, there's no good explanation for why that warrant was delayed. She couldn't give one. I reported, my headline was, for the very first time, not during the inquiry, because it was just so minimized what they would show, the reporters and the public, we learned that a CSIS officer repeatedly internally was emailing, there appears to be, or there's the concern that the government is interfering in this national security warrant, right? Yeah. So that, why didn't that come out in the hearings? Why wasn't that evidence tested or other lawyers given a chance to dig into that? I think that would have been quite, transparent. But okay, we don't get to read the emails that this CSIS officer, who's obviously legally trained, and the email says this person had a concern that the warrant is not going to be approved, right? But Justice Hogue basically says, okay, so Bill Blair's chief of staff says she never asked for changes to the warrant. She never stalled the warrant. Bill Blair claims that he only saw it on the 54th day, and yet admits, being briefed on it before. And then she takes their word and says, well, there's no evidence of interference. And yet there's no good explanation for why an unprecedented delay that could be a type of a very serious concern, she acknowledges, whether she uses the term obstruction of justice or not, that could have damaged an investigation. As we've talked about, many lawyers were saying the only logical inference is that the Liberal Party was dragging it out and taking measures to protect themselves, so that people named, in association to this warrant, who are senior Liberal Party members, could be insulated from the activity, right? Many lawyers came out and said that in the hearing, but Justice Hogue wouldn't go there. She wouldn't infer anything was untoward. She said, people dropped the ball. There needs to be better communication. And that applies to so many pieces of evidence regarding Justin Trudeau's government in the inquiry that we've talked about, from targeting papers that supposedly don't get up to Trudeau. You and I don't believe that. Various documents that don't get to his desk that he was supposed to sign off, to take direct actions to counter interference that never happened. And yet we're supposed to believe that it was poor communication, or Bill Blair doesn't open his email, therefore he can't be involved in warning opposition MP Michael Chan that he's being targeted by Chinese intelligence, right? When you put all those cases together and then step back, the pattern is of partisan interference and not wanting to intervene against Chinese interference because it is assisting the Liberal Party and attacking their main challenger, the Conservatives, right? This is the logical inference with all these cases and patterns. And yet Justice Hogue comes away just like a senior Trudeau government official would say, oh, it's bad communication, right? Okay, you're a lawyer, you're a judge, you're trained to use your mind. And you actually don't have to be a lawyer to tell Canadians, this is not a court of law. There's facts, and then there's the legal definition of court evidence, intelligence, which is, solid information stacked up. And then she just takes the legalistic view and says, okay, some bad things happen, but, no one's really to blame. There's no accountability. And as my colleague, former senior RCMP officer Gary Clement, who wrote an op-ed for the Bureau, says, that's the exact problem with the inquiry. There's zero accountability. There's there's a lot of shady stuff going on, and yet no one to blame for it, simply.
I read her report, and this is how I feel. I feel either she is incompetent, blindingly gullible and naive, or she's part of it. Or she's protecting Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party, which I would assume is the third. How do you feel? Just based, what sense are you getting?
Stepping away from it, that is my sense. That again, I wrote a story that a diaspora group that's populated by people that I know to be the experts on Chinese Communist Party interference in Canada, because they've lived it and they're super intelligent people. They dropped out of the inquiry because they said this is going to be David Johnston 2.0, more information, but they just didn't want to be part of it because they saw people involved with it that they had concerns about. And they pointed to Justice Hogue's record saying, okay, the Honorable Justice has worked at a law firm in Quebec where, with connections to Liberal Prime Minister Jean Chrétien in the past, Pierre Trudeau. So they said she's part of, this circle of Quebec lawyers that it's impossible for them not to have, some connectivity to the deeper levels of, let's just call it, connectivity between the Chinese threat actors who target elite business persons, elite lawyers, right? So for them to make a strong finding, if we're going to pick a judge, one person, and they literally work within those networks, not that they've ever done anything wrong, but humans are humans. I mean, don't put lawyers and judges by any means on a pedestal, because I know for a fact, I'll just keep it to lawyers. Enough of them are involved, unfortunately, in direct criminal activity in Canada with regards to money laundering. My work, I can say that with confidence.
Yeah.
They're humans, right? They have business networks. They, have affinities for, it's normal. So for a person like that to come out and make some strong findings, doesn't even have to be, under any influence. It's just like, oh, I know that person, Mr. Chrétien, he's such, right? They'd never do anything wrong, right? And so it's just, it's all about networks. And so this Diaspora group said, we don't trust it. We don't trust the setup. And I would say, I didn't take that position. I said, let's see where it goes. I'm going to be from Missouri on this one. Right? I'm going to watch. And, at the end of the day, I think that Diaspora group was right. And you have to look at the commitment to say, okay, this is what they've been looking for their whole life, an examination of how their lives are being impacted and our government is doing nothing to protect them. They stepped away from it. That takes some gumption, and they were right.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the impact on the Diaspora groups in a minute. But I first want to take a look at our intelligence agency, because for our American listeners, CSIS is Canada's CIA. They're our intelligence service. They're the people who are supposed to be working behind the scenes to keep our country safe and to protect the citizens and protect the national interests. And, what really bothers me is that you have these, for lack of a better word, these fucking backwood yahoos who, talk a big game on the internet and say all sorts of stuff, some of whom have big followings, and the RCMP and CSIS have giant files on these people. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that in certain circumstances, these people have been set up to be specifically for the purpose of being silenced or removed from public view. And then you have probably the most detrimental threat ever facing our country. And these people, these people working in these intelligence services and in law enforcement can't even get their emails read or replied to. I mean, what does that say to you as somebody who's in that world and frequently reading the documents and watching how things unfold? What does that tell you?
So you're referring to like people that would be called ideologically motivated extremists,
Right.
backwoods yahoos that have developed a very negative view of what's happening to our military or our country.
Right.
Some of them, no doubt, extremists, racists. Some of them probably...
Some of them just angry Canadian citizens too. I just want to say that too.
Some of them dangerous, in my view. But no question, Canadian intelligence is right to look into right-wing extremism. But I have been told from the very people on the inside of these agencies that the political base of the Justin Trudeau Liberals was keen to over-exaggerate those threats. So let's be very clear here. My own personal view is there's people that quite clearly, you may say they've been set up. I think some of them are dangerous. But what I'm saying is the Trudeau Liberal government wants CSIS and the RCMP to focus more on those people, right? Because we could go on and on, but I'm saying I'm told that. I'll give you an example. I've told you again, never in my life was I supportive of the trucker convoy, but I've been told people in the RCMP, as that was going on, were told by the political level around Justin Trudeau, we need to gin up the case. So here it's called an investigative timeline. Can you fill in some dots there? Because, right, we need it to look as serious as we think it is. So that's showing, some sort of interference. Same sort of thing with another very serious situation where, Sikh extremists, who I have said, the ones that are extremely problematic, are deeply involved in organized crime, which, by the way, the Hogue report now says the RCMP and CSIS believed. But the Trudeau government, because it would be very supportive more supported by the Sikh community, would come out and say, this is happening, CSIS and the RCMP jump on that. And yet, I think, as we've discussed, as it regards what I would call a more sophisticated, business-like magnitudes of a deeper threat long-term to Canada, and that is how China leverages corruption and organized crime to undermine both the diasporas and politicians. The Trudeau government would not want to look at that, I believe. So that's what's happening. And I'm not speculating. I'm told by people on the inside that the Trudeau Liberal government had a shiny new thing that they wanted CSIS to focus on, called ideologically motivated extremism on the right. Okay, fair enough. But let's bounce it back to the left and look at what's happening in our universities and streets, where you have, whether they're directly sponsored by Iran or, Hamas networks, targeting the Jewish community and just wild-eyed, let me be diplomatic, just wild-eyed socialists on the left that are useful idiots. The Trudeau government has not been very interested in looking into those networks, right? So the polarity there is politicized. So there's my answer to you going across the board.
Yeah, and completely obvious, right? And so, I just want to kind of clarify something here for listeners who may have been keeping up with, what has happened in Canada over the last 5 years. But, by no means am I defending what any of these people who would be considered extreme, even by my circumstances. And trust me, it takes a lot to make me believe somebody's extreme. I'm not defending what they're saying. I don't defend their views. I don't share their views at all whatsoever. But I do defend their right to say it. I think that's part of, living in a free country. And as long as they're operating within the established legal parameters, then there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to say what they want to say. And I just feel like there is an undue amount of resources that have been poured into monitoring these people, of which and this is the other problem. And I'll expand on this a little bit. The other problem is that people like myself, I get, that definition expands. And then once it does, I get roped in somehow. And, I've been told a couple of times that there may be a file on me, or certain people listening to things that I say or watching what I do on the internet. And so what happens is that core group of like actually extreme people, that definition just keeps growing and growing and growing until it encompasses everything, until Sam Cooper is labeled a conspiracy theorist. Right. And that's the problem. But I just find it strange how there is just this, seemingly endless amount of resources poured into monitoring what is mostly angry Canadian citizens. Yes, there are definitely ideologically motivated extremists out there, but most of these people are just angry citizens who are voicing their opinion, and we all get labeled as Nazis and alt-right and all that other stuff. But the Trudeau government has chosen to focus on these people. Meanwhile, we have this very real problem that Sam Cooper has written a book about, Sam Cooper has been reporting on and presented documents and facts that prove this stuff is happening. We hold an inquiry and the outcome is nothing. There's no problem, you know?
Yeah, you don't see the government rushing to, table a bill as forceful as the Online Hate Act, which again, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but what I'm saying is very clearly all governments do it, but some are worse than others. The Trudeau government, in terms of politicizing, security and ignoring what everyone in the world with any logic and sense and intellectual rigor knows is the real big threat to Canada, China, and minimizing that for their own reasons to the detriment of, our sovereignty, and then focusing on things which I'm saying some of them quite clearly are a problem, but as you say, using their political, proxies and online armies to like spread the net wider and turn it from focusing on a real problem, which is what police should do, to casting a wide net over all your political enemies and just, smearing them under certain labels. That happens. And I think that's part of their election strategy. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is the sort of thing that the Soviets did. And, the communist Chinese did and continue to do. Surprise, surprise. Right. And so I don't want to go too far down that hole. But I do want to ask you, what impact does this have on the diaspora communities? Like this outcome? Because so to make a long story short, and Sam, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I gathered from the conclusion is that we have a little bit of a problem, but not a big problem. And it's not a problem that really requires much attention. We don't have treasonous activity happening within our government or on the side on behalf of politicians. And so therefore the outcome is nothing. Nothing happens. We spent millions of dollars on this inquiry. Once again, taxpayer dollars. We wasted our time. Sam, you sat and covered it and dissected it and poured your energy into it, and the outcome is nothing. So for you and I mean, in a way, it kind of benefits us because you and I get to talk about this for the next year as shit gets infinitely worse. But what about the people who are directly in the crosshairs? What happens to them? And who are the people who are directly in the crosshairs?
Yeah, I'll give you a concrete example. I broke a story this morning for the Bureau. It could not be a more clear-cut example of the downside of Justice Hogue and her conclusions. In Richmond, your hometown, where Kenny Chu, let me just put it this way. A press release went out this week that said from a person named Wei Yun, who's a well-known, a long-time sort of conservative politician. She's running for the nomination in Richmond for the Conservatives. So is Kenny Chu, in my words, bravely trying to come back from the attack on his life and career. And she puts out a press release saying, essentially, no foreign interference. The Justice Hogue report has found that there was no foreign interference. There were some minor issues, but there's no evidence of what Kenny Chu has falsely accused. I'm using this political press release, which would be a joy to the Chinese Communist Party. Wei Yun, the opponent of Kenny Chu, trying to run in the next election, says that Kenny Chu falsely and carelessly blamed Chinese interference on his loss in the 2021 election, and by doing that fueled anti-Asian racism. And Justice Hogue has said no interference, right? You could not have a more clear-cut example of using Hogue's weak, watered-down, whitewashed conclusions and saying nothing to see here, and Kenny Chu is wrong, right? Therefore, he shouldn't be nominated. And as I wrote this morning, nothing could be farther from the truth. In the inquiry, an Elections Canada Act investigation was tabled. It did not result in charges, but the lead investigator says they found that there was a concerted effort from the Chinese consulate community leaders allegedly involved in United Front activity, some who allegedly, whether this can be substantiated or not, bragged of defeating Kenny Chiu. Some of these leaders, remember, we're talking about a redacted report, have the capacity to travel to Beijing and take part in presidential level United Front meetings. And there was a clear and concerted effort to smear Kenny Chiu for his, for wanting a foreign agent registry. So it did happen, but Canada's current laws could not support charges, right? So what happened in the election, as I have reported, and I believe is cited in the NSI Cop report, is Kenny Chiu's opponent was interviewed by Beijing proxy media in British Columbia and said, what do you think of the foreign interference bill? The Liberal candidate says, I see it as a discriminatory policy. Afterwards, he gets election endorsements from media. He gets the United Front leaders out pounding the pavement for him. So he essentially says Kenny Chiu is exposing the community to racism. This is not what the Liberal Party of Canada is about. And he benefits, right? And he wins. Kenny Chiu loses. Most people that looked at the evidence said, whether you can say that that's exactly the reason Kenny Chiu lost, the difference between winning and losing doesn't matter. The evidence is he was attacked. No one's questioning that. And yet, from Justice Hogue's conclusion, the impact upon Kenny Chiu and the community of Richmond, they're left in confusion, and he's being attacked again, essentially as an anti-Asian racist and a divider of the community, right? The evidence can't get any more clear that whether it's that candidate that's running against Kenny Chiu or people behind them, they have used Hogue's conclusions, and now they're using it in disinformation, weaponizing it against Kenny Chiu. So that's an example. Egregious, I think.
Yeah.
What about the community at large? Again, I've written stories. A number of these leaders have come out and said, we now have less confidence in Canada's willingness and capacity to protect us, the Asian diaspora, because Hogue's report essentially gives a green light to the threat actors, China, could be other nations as well, other diasporas involved, that you won't be held accountable. So game on, continue, right? And a number of these leaders have said, this isn't just about policy. This is our life and death for our community, right? So that's the impact.
Yeah. And just, myself being from Richmond, BC, having lived there all the way up until 2 years ago, like I can tell you from personal experience, like there are a lot of protests that happen in Richmond Center, which is, the downtown section. There's a lot of Falun Gong supporters and practitioners down there. That's a group that has been targeted by the CCP for elimination, not just for harassment, for elimination.
Yes.
Hong Kong independence protesters, and these are very real issues. Like just because we're in Canada, those issues tend to be very far away. But Hong Kong independence is a real issue, and it's one that directly impacts us. And so the point is that there are a lot of people, downtown Richmond protesting, and there are United Front Work Department thugs who show up to intimidate them and shut down those protests. And there have been a few circumstances where violence has broken out and protesters are getting beaten over the head with their own signs by United Front Work Department thugs.
Who will be, we've both seen it. Some of them will be ultra wealthy students from UBC,
yes,
University of BC, Simon Fraser, and we've seen it in Toronto, Lamborghini or Ferrari driving, children of thugs from China that are under United Front control in these Canadian universities. Yes.
And are deployed to silence these people. And see, for somebody like myself, for somebody like Sam Cooper, like I look at these ultra wealthy, kids, and I'm like, if one of them took a swing at me, I'd use one to beat the other. Right. But for somebody who has recently escaped communist China or escaped 20 years ago, to see these thugs show up, to see representatives for the communist regime that they escaped show up in Canada and try to silence them and shut down their voice, that's a very intimidating thing to face.
Yes, because they know The consulate bosses are behind that. It's not just these. It's not just these young wealthy thugs are ultra patriotic. No, they're being tasked and directed. Yes.
And, I want to say this too, because there is a very large Chinese population in Canada, but specifically in the Vancouver area. And, there's a lot of kids I grew up with whose parents, I'm talking, basically took rafts from mainland China to Taiwan to escape. And then were hunted by CCP agents in Taiwan until they were able to get out of Taiwan to Canada, right? Like, this is a very serious issue for these people. Mm-hmm. This isn't, we tend to talk about things from a bird's eye view, right? From a third person perspective. We have an outer look. But imagine yourself running from the Canadian government and being chased halfway across the world.
Right. It's not enough to escape the country and become a new citizen. They're reaching into our diaspora in an effort to protect their regime. Yeah.
And I think that is the biggest slap in the face of all, is the fact that you have Justin Trudeau and his Liberal Party very obviously working with this hostile foreign regime and the groups that are operating in Canada, specifically in Vancouver, where there is a Belt and Road headquarters. And now you're a citizen of a country where your government is clandestinely working with the operatives who would love nothing more than to put you in a box and send you back to mainland China, and have threatened to do so on many occasions. So there is no escape. There's no safe haven for you. There's nowhere you can go to escape this. And that's where we are now here in this country. And you have a Liberal leadership contest ongoing right now, with the front runner being somebody, Mark Carney, being somebody who is in direct contact and also benefiting from these relationships with this hostile regime. So it looks like, should the Liberals win our next election, that those relationships will continue and potentially even get hotter, right?
Yeah, Mark Carney has been out to the riding in Richmond, where Kenny Chew's opponent, whether wittingly or not, very clearly benefited from Beijing's United Front highest level operatives, highest level in Canada media assets. The Liberal politician benefited. No one can deny that. No one of honor, integrity, and intelligence, because the evidence is there, right? Whether wittingly or not, let's leave that for now. Come back. But here it is. Mark Carney went to that very riding, and my colleague Bob Mackin, who's very good at covering the West Coast of Canada United Front networks, had photographs showing that an elite local listed official United Front leader was there, along with a media entity supporting Mark Carney. So yes, Mark Carney is tapping into that support that Trudeau benefited from. Absolutely.
And it's disgusting, because these are the people who are selling our country out. And I'll say it outright, right? Like, that we're being sold piece by piece, bit by bit, but little by little. And so I guess we're going to wrap it up here pretty soon, Sam, but I do want to touch on that a little bit, because he was photographed with these people. And this was a fundraiser that they were at, right? And for our listeners, I want to frame it this way. No matter where you are around the world, this is a situation where the political parties, the partisanship doesn't matter, because you have a conservative candidate who, like you said, to CCP's joy, releases this very pro, United Front Work Department letter, basically saying no interference. And she's on the conservative side. And then you have Mark Carney, who's running for Liberal leadership, fraternizing with the same people. These are all the same people. So in this case, partisanship doesn't matter, right?
And the same person that beat Kenny Chew by either wittingly or unwittingly taking Chinese Communist Party support and indicating that Kenny Chew, falsely alleging Kenny Chew's responsible for racism. Yeah, that'll be the Liberal candidate, Mark Carney. That's the Liberal candidate that's supporting Mark Carney. So we can put both of them in the box of being supported by China. Kenny Chew's opponent, using Justice Hogue's conclusion, now seeking Kenny Chew's nomination seat for the Conservatives, right? The two main challengers for that seat. So very obviously, the United Front has an interest in all sides. They want that seat in Richmond. And again, bringing it back to what came out in the Hogue Commission, and, diligent Canadians, curious Canadians can find this. There are documents that say this Richmond riding is of key interest to the Ministry of State Security, Chinese intelligence, and China. This is one of its targeted ridings, right? And so we're just, these little concrete pieces of evidence we've unspooled here are showing that.
And it's, yeah, and it sucks that that's my hometown, because I can tell you, and for the listeners, me and Sam have talked about this at length in previous episodes, so I won't go into detail, but I mean, we're talking a complete transformation of that town over the course of 30 years. I mean, it's unrecognizable today. I mean, I joke that Canada's future name is Little Beijing, but if that ever did happen, Richmond, BC would be the capital of Little Beijing. And it sucks, man. It's heartbreaking to see. And it's heartbreaking because I have friends who I grew up with. I wrote a story or an essay not too long ago where I talk about my experience growing up in Richmond, and a friend of mine whose dad escaped through Taiwan while being pursued, made a home in Canada, and had United Front Work Department spies move in right next door to him. And he thought this was the crazy thing. I'm like 10 years old. And my friend goes, yeah, he thinks there's spies living next door, right? Well, it turned out they were more than likely spies. That's the lengths these people will go to find you. They will actually employ spies to move into the house next door and watch you and intimidate you.
I'd like to say that these are not isolated stories, because people will hear that and say, okay, first of all, is the person from Taiwan paranoid? Or are you misinterpreting the story? I've heard the same stories, right? That people that either, because they're influential, because they have business ties, they might not even be an Asian immigrant. They might be a person with interesting business ties. They believe that United Front agents have moved beside them, right? So when you start to hear all these stories, they're not isolated. And that brings us back to Hogue's commission, which the conclusion was, yes, there are attempts going on, but the compromises are isolated situations, which again, completely false. The evidence is opposite of that. Opposite.
So on that note, before we wrap it up here, I want to talk about an op-ed that appeared on the Bureau. Another brilliant piece, man. I love how you're bringing these writers together, dude. I mean, the Bureau was my favorite thing to read. Now it's like double favorite.
Thank you.
I want to talk about this op-ed and the liberal data machine, and this phenomenon of the liberal rats. I can't find I can't find a more suitable way to refer to them. All kind of like you described in our last episode, that toxic alien slime that is slid off of Justin Trudeau and now attached itself to Mark Carney. What is currently happening in the Liberal Party? I mean, what is going on behind the scenes?
Well, funny enough, I think people online are getting a kick out of Ruby Dalla, one of the candidates that's running for
my favorite Liberal candidate.
And she's got meme game. Like she's calling Carney Trudeau 2.0.
Yeah.
And, she did that. What was the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito?
Twins. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, again, this is a liberal contestant that's coming out and saying Carney is he's the PMO candidate. He's the establishment candidate. Trudeau is under the table passing the baton. Chrystia Freeland, who I know you're not a fan of, basically saying the same thing, like a lot of weird stuff going on. But the point here is that it's not, some analysts that aren't fans of the Liberal Party just saying that very clearly Carney has come in and slipped in and put on Trudeau's jacket, and he's, going to become prime minister without an election.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the Liberal Party are saying that. So, yeah, you pointed to this op-ed. Albert Paul, a very honorable man, he was the chair of the audit committee for the Federal Liberal Agency. So this is a high-level accountant that, knows how to knows how to put facts and figures together. And he did a story about how there's a guy called Thomas Pitfield, who's Trudeau's groomsman, one of the people in his wedding party, along with some other, Trudeau ministers.
I know, amazing how they all just landed in government, right?
They just landed in government. They're all behind Carney now, but Pitfield runs this election machine data tool called Data Sciences. And this has, I would say, the keys to the kingdom of, how the Liberal Party can analyze ridings and, micro adjust kind of like wedge issues and, look, polling and the messaging that comes from it and how you run your campaign, what you know about 40 million Canadians. This company, Data Sciences, is run by Trudeau's friend, Tom Pitfield. Tom Pitfield's wife, Anna Gainey, won a by-election in Montreal. So she's now a Liberal caucus member. She's a supporter of Mark Carney. And so people say, qualified, political reporters that have political sources. I'm not a political source reporter, but very well politically sourced people in Ottawa say that Katie Telford and Gerald Butts are behind Mark Carney. This isn't even a debate anymore. Maybe a week ago it was, but again, Trudeau 2.0, Carney is taking the baton, and the concern of Albert Paul, this former Liberal Party auditor, essentially, that is that the game is fixed. The people around Data Sciences, that is Trudeau's inner circle, are supporting Mark Carney, whether overtly or under the radar. All of the people are, whether the company is or not, doesn't really matter, right? And so Mr. Paul says there's a concern that Trudeau's friend and groomsman, Tom Pitfield, has contracts from the Liberal Party of Canada to run this data science company. That is, he's getting money, untold amount of money, to, do polling and do campaign kind of science, giving him also all this access to private information. Well, what level of private, just information on, tens of millions of Canadians. And then this is supposed to be, a race, but is it really a race if the people around Trudeau, the people around this Liberal Party company are supporting Mark Carney? So in a nutshell, that Mr. Paul is saying it looks like a conflict of interest, and it's scary in a lot of ways. Additionally, I did a little bit of, polling of corporate records, and there's another guy, a senior Liberal Party official. I want to draw a little line here. His name is Braden Cayley. He was or is a director of Data Sciences, a very key Liberal Party guy that, from my review of the Hogue Commission documents, had a high-level security clearance and was briefed in 2021 on some concern around, I believe, the Richmond riding, which apparently Justin Trudeau and his party didn't act on, from the best I can judge from redacted documents, right? So what I'm saying is, oh, interesting. This guy that, is connected to this company that was the subject of my colleague's editorial. We can now draw a line back to that Richmond riding where all manner of, let's just say, stuff that doesn't pass the smell test is going on all the time.
Yeah. And, just to elaborate on that a little bit too, just to throw a few more names into the mix. Kenny Chiu isn't the only politician that's been targeted. Jenny Kwan from the NDP, which is Canada's Socialist Party, was targeted. Kevin Vuong was targeted. Like this is an ongoing thing. And so you have, you have the Liberal Party fixing the race. Let's say that, right? Because that's kind of obvious at this point. I mean, we know we're getting Mark Carney, Chrystia Freeland, Karina Gould, Ruby Dalla. As much as I would love to see Ruby Dalla become Liberal leader and interim prime minister. Yeah, I would, but let's be honest here. I will say in this case, it is a foregone conclusion. And The scary thing here is that we are going to end up with Prime Minister Mark Carney, because he's going to win that Liberal leadership race. He will become interim prime minister. He will be prime minister for a short time before the election. And then depending on how the election turns out. See, I have a conspiracy theory, and I'll share it with you here. I wrote a little short blurb about it on X the other day that got a lot of traction. But I think the Canadians people are being set up, and we can close on this. This is the setup. I think what's happening is when Trump announced those tariffs, I think the Liberal Party saw it as an opportunity. And I think they saw it as a political opportunity. And, the very easy thing for the Liberals to have done would be to acknowledge that we have a problem with our border, that we do have organized crime operating in the country, pledge publicly to crack down, and then privately negotiate a deal with Trump. That would have been the political thing to do, right? But I think Trudeau and the Liberals specifically, I really don't think Trudeau has a brain in his head. I think he's just told what to do and he does it. I think the Liberal Party decided to push back because they knew if they pushed back, then that would trigger Trump to double down, because Trump's that kind of guy, right? He'll just keep doubling down, which Trump has done. Now we have these tariffs. People are watching this a few days after those tariffs have been enacted, but we have those incoming tariffs. The Canadian people are going to suffer. Mark Carney's going to win the Liberal leadership race, be installed as interim prime minister. Carney's going to do what the Liberal Party knew they should have done from day one. He's going to go down to the U.S., cut a deal with Trump. Canadian economy surges. Carney's going to pull all the stops with his finance buddies. Canadian economy surges more. The economy becomes the election issue. Polyev struggles. Canadians get duped again. Mark Carney wins. That's the playbook I see happening here.
It could be. And I mean, what is clear is I would agree that they're going to make this about fighting Trump. They're going to make it about splashing out a major relief program and try to buy votes that way. Instead of, I mean, we could talk about it for a long time, but instead of, as my information is, standing up something at the border and actually cracking down on fentanyl and money laundering, which is an existential problem for Canada if we don't take care of it.
And this is the thing. It's not just a problem for the United States. And we'll wrap on this. It's not just a problem for the United States. It's a problem for Canada too. I mean, just walk around Vancouver. There's a very obvious fentanyl problem happening there. There are thousands of Canadians dead and dying and will die very soon because of this fentanyl problem that is clearly the product of Chinese organized crime and Mexican cartels operating in our country. Donald Trump is very correct. And Joe Biden. I mean, it was Joe Biden and his administration who first identified this problem. They are very correct in identifying Canada as a security threat, because we are. And we needed to tighten up. And we had 10 years of Beverly Hills 90210 running our government. And now here we are. Maybe not Beverly Hills 90210, Beijing 90210 running our government. Now here we are. And so, basically what Donald Trump has done is he's forcing our government to behave like adults. And the proper diplomatic thing to do would be to behave like adults, considering how reliant we are on the United States. And we went the opposite direction. And I think that there's a reason for that. Now, maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I just don't see any other reason for that, right? Like this isn't a David and Goliath scenario where Canada is going to stand up to the mighty Goliath. No, we're just going to get crushed by tariffs on something that we should have been watching and keeping an eye on from day one. And I do like the fact that you put your name out there as a potential border czar, because I would love Sam Cooper, the border czar.
I meant I would give advice. I literally, honestly, I'll put the pause button on the bureau, and if people want to bring me on as a consultant to a former general from Canada, I'm not exaggerating. I'm not joking. Within the Canadian government, people have called me the subject matter expert, right? They're not talking, you're the subject matter expert of a journalist. They're saying, if you were in Canadian government, you'd be the subject matter expert on these issues of the Vancouver model, of fentanyl, of Canada turning a blind eye. So I put the offer out there, and it's real. If there's a government of integrity in Canada that wants me to give some advice and to talk to people that have actual power, military training, law degrees, former police officers, I will do it. And I'm already asked. I do it on a pro bono basis. I give advice to police forces in Canada on how to better protect the diaspora. So I will extend that. And I'm serious. I would.
Yeah. I listen, man. I maybe I misread that post because I read it as Sam Cooper, the Borders Czar, and I was like, dude, I will be your first deputy, brother. I'll wear the badge and everything.
I'm not putting myself forward as the czar, but I would lend my knowledge. If we have a czar, I would lend my knowledge for sure.
Well, if we lived in a just country where things made sense, my friend, you would be in government. But we don't. So you're an investigative journalist taking down the corruption in our government. Sam Cooper, my brother, it is always a pleasure, man. I always say this, but I'm so glad and happy that I get to call you a friend. I'm so glad we get to have these discussions regularly. When I read that Hogue Commission conclusion, I immediately thought of you. I went to the Bureau right away because I was like waiting for it. And then I went to your X, and then I saw the stream of thought, the Sam Cooper stream of thought going down the X account. And I was like, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want to be like, okay, I'm reacting. No, I'm stating some facts. The diaspora says they're being let down. And then the stories follow in the coming days showing exactly that. And by the way, I'm monitoring, former CSIS employees and that can be named as in, not sources, but experts that have the same opinions.
Yeah. And I feel like, I have seen some things from really loud public voices about Canada and the things that are happening here. And a lot of people feel that there's something brewing, something bad. And I can't help but feel the same way, man. Like, I don't know if we're going to still have a country in a year.
That thought, I think a lot of Canadians are in a state of shock, right? They didn't think for the past few years, it's been getting very wobbly. And those loud, angry people that you've been talking about, some of them I'm saying are very wrong. We should never say, in my view, that, we have violent thoughts towards a politician. I don't think that's right. But there's people that have recognized Canada's going in the wrong direction. They want to see change. They're not being listened to. And so here we are. Now 40 million Canadians, or people that, we are literally having the existential thoughts that we might not be here, which is insane. Who would have thought, right? Especially for people that were born here or lived most of their life here. You never would have ever thought you'd be in this position that we're in today.
Never. And, part of me thinks maybe amalgamation with the United States or certain parts of our country being annexed is our only way out. I don't know.
Well, look at, you've asked before, a report came out of the RCMP where it said, a young generation appears to be having thoughts of, whether radicalism or whether Canada is viable. Look, now there's polls that 18 to 34, I believe it was 40% would welcome joining the United States. Right. Again, more concrete evidence exactly of this existential crisis we're in now.
Yeah. And we didn't have to get there. But this is the result of Trudeau's post-national state. When you remove a people's national identity, they don't know who or what they are anymore. And I think we're there now. We don't know what this is. We don't know what Canada even means. Right. We're there. And what does it mean for us? What does this country mean to us? Because so much has been taken away from us and so much has been done and we have been so ignored. And, look at this foreign interference inquiry. And I don't want to drag this out, Sam. We'll wrap this up now. But look at the foreign interference inquiry. Dude, that is the product of years of your work. As your friend, I read the conclusion and I'm like, this is fucking bullshit. Because you've laid it out. You've laid out the roadmap. And for anybody who's interested, just go to the Bureau, start at the top, go on Amazon, buy Willful Blindness. Sam Cooper gave you the roadmap. He showed you how this all works. how it's all going.
Thank you for that. And two thoughts. Again, look, I don't think that they'll mind. The government of Taiwan bought a number of copies of my book to give it to other people in government. That's indicating to you that a foreign government is saying this is real. More and more people in Washington are asking me about my findings, potentially, could I go down to Washington and talk to people, etc. Right? This is real. And your thought about, people where we are, will we be Canada? Do we want to be Canada? This is not just people that have grown up here, like you and I, our whole lives. This is people that came here. I'm hearing from, you don't know how much I hear, people have come from other nations and what they've been promised has not been delivered. And they're looking at moving away from the nation that they put so much time, effort, money, blood, sweat, and tears to move their families here. Now they're looking at moving elsewhere. So this is about people from around the world that believed in Canada, and now their dreams are eroding.
And just as an example, I spoke to a neighbor of mine this morning who's getting his H-1B visa with the United States processed. He's from India. He has been in Canada for 20 years, and he's leaving because he's seeing the problems that he left behind arriving here.
Yeah. And
he doesn't want to be here for that. So he is in the final stages of his H-1B visa. He's an engineer and he's a tech guy. He's actually, I don't want to give him away, but he's an important brain, an important mind in tech who came to Canada and came to Alberta specifically to establish our tech industry, and is leaving because he doesn't want anything to do with us anymore.
We keep going further and further here, but you asked, what's the impact on the diaspora of the Hogue Commission report? What's the impact of foreign interference? That's the impact. It's not just about people fearing for their lives, which is true. Yeah. It's about people losing their faith in Canada. And that's happening.
Let's leave it there. Sam Cooper, my brother, let's get back together in a couple of weeks. There's other things that you have reported on that I wanted to talk about, but I felt like these were, top of the docket. But for anybody who wants to kind of get ahead of me and Sam's next episode, read up on what was the title about that the medical marijuana story that you did?
Emerald Haze. How the story is about how Health Canada pot licenses are essentially used by lawyers, business persons with direct connectivity to organized crime.
Go read it. We're going to talk about that one next time. We'll go a little bit deeper into the weeds. I just thought that this was important for us to discuss. Everybody listening, follow Sam Cooper on X at Scooper Cooper. I am a habitual refresher of Sam's feed. Dude, the last couple days maybe couple weeks have been stellar. Sam, you're just on fire. Everything. I'm just like, I just can't stop reading. Go to thebureau.news, sign up as a paid subscriber. This op-ed that we talked about today was a paid only piece. We only graced the surface. There's a lot more to it. Sam is really developing the Bureau into a newspaper. Please subscribe and pay to subscribe to the Bureau. We only have Sam Cooper and the reporting that he does because we are supporting him and helping him earn a living doing this. So this works both ways. So go to thebureau.news, sign up as a paid subscriber, get complete access to everything. Sam, you have anything to say before we close?
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, my brother. It's always good to talk to you.